Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you all very much indeed for coming along today to my campaign launch. I'm going to be introduced by the enfant terrible of the cultural arts scene and culture within Scotland, Richard Demarco, who needs little introduction to a crowd in Summerhall, Scotland's premier arts venue. My office has been here for about 2 years now. We love being in Summerhall, especially at this time of year. The chaos, the energy, the vibrancy, the cultural aspect of Europe's contribution to Scotland and Scotland's contribution to Europe is absolutely fundamental to our sense of ourselves as a nation and ourselves within the wider world. And Richard and I have had a simpatico going on some time in that Richard created the International Festival out of the ashes of disaster, of human failure, political failure, when elite politics went wrong. It should give us pause at the moment when you see things like the 2-minute hate we saw at the Republican National Convention just last night. We live in troubled times. And Richard created a space for people to talk across borders about culture, about their own lives, their sense of their place in the world, and a place to talk. And the European Union was born out of exactly that ethos, exactly that multilateral, internationalist, collaborative spirit. That's what I want my country to be part of. So I'm introducing Richard, and then Richard is introducing me. We're doing a nice wee double act that way. We're wearing several hats this morning, but we'll keep it loose. Richard's going to say a number of points about the work that we have around us here, the Gesamtkunstwerk that is the Demarco Archive. It is a world-class cultural artefact, a living, breathing resource about how Scotland has interacted with our wider world going back decades. And we must find a suitable home for it within Scotland. So I can announce today that I've invited European Commissioner for Culture, Nazravic, to come to Scotland to meet with Richard, to spend time seeing the archive and to explore avenues of European funding and wider support to make sure that we can find a proper venue and a proper home for what is a world-class Scottish cultural resource. So I'm entirely on board with that. But with that, I pass over to Il Professore, Richard Demarco. Please.
Thank you very much. That's my Italian blood, you see. I can't help but addressing my fellow human beings, not just with words, but with more than a hug, with a kiss.
Works for me, Chief.
I am here, and I want to make certain things very clear. I'm a survivor. At 86 years of age, I suppose I'm the oldest person in the room. And therefore, I can say that when the Edinburgh Festival was born, I was alive. Can you imagine that? I was still at school. I was 17 years of age. And I've already had my thoughts on leaving Edinburgh, leaving Scotland, and going where practically every Scottish artist had gone during these rather odd years of the war and the post-war period. But then a miracle happened. And Edinburgh, this little city, this town really, it's not quite like Glasgow. It's not a city with the kind of streets you assume belong to a city. It's possessed of one outstanding feature, a castle. And that castle caused the founder of the Edinburgh Festival to think of Salzburg. And he thought, my God, what does the world need? What does Europe need now in 1947? It needs the language of the arts as the language of healing, of reconciliation, of coming together. The language which identifies Europe as one cultural identity. And perhaps the ending of what I've known all my life, from my childhood, from my boyhood, a landscape of conflict. Now you'll notice, if you've got that in your hand, that it says, what is the Demarco Archive and why is it such an important asset for European culture? It's the only one in the whole world. It's the only artifact. It's taken me practically all my life since I was 17 to create. I couldn't do it alone. I had to work with all my friends throughout the whole of Europe to create it. There are 4,500 artworks, and they represent the whole of Europe. Where does it go? Now, if it goes to Scotland, if it's in a building in Scotland, I think it should be the first ever building associated with European culture. And I think that's what we need. We need to have our children and those at university, in fact the whole population, not just aware of the history of the Edinburgh Festival, but the history of Europe, which caused me to inherit the madness of the Second World War. Wasn't a good idea to be an Italo-Scot then, I can assure you, not with this kind of face, not with this kind of name. And so, I have used the language of art, the most powerful language in the world, more powerful than politics. And by the way, I can see this man is what Joseph Beuys would describe as a heavily disguised artist. He's a poet. He thinks, how can I say, beyond the limitations of the horizon. He thinks in what Beuys called the space of the offing, that which we can't quite see, but which lies ahead of us tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. There's a map there. That's where I work. I don't work in Scotland. I've never, ever, ever imagined that I was breathing the air of somewhere which was not European. Everything about me is about, how can I say, my forebears, who were refugees, if you like, from an Italy which had the problem of the Risorgimento. And that Risorgimento caused Europe to have a united country. And this was a process which I think enabled the Italo-Scots to feel that they belonged to something rather important. And when they came here, I'm talking about my grandparents in the 19th century, they came to help Europeanize Scotland. Do you understand that? Every little village, every little town, every city suddenly had a European dimension with an Italian, how can I say, characteristic. I'm going to simply ask you to consider why I feel that this is a great moment for you all. This Parliament that we have here needs someone who knows how to survive, as it were. I think I better use that word. In the complexities of the European Parliament. And here we have a stalwart, someone who has, for the last, significant period of time, represented Scotland. We saw that when he stood up and the world television recorded the applause that came from all the European parliamentarians when he said, let us remember in this post-Brexit time that Scotland didn't vote for the breakup of, how can I say, the process of breaking up the European Union. The Scots actually voted to be, as it were, part of Europe. And so, I want you to know that really what we're dealing with here, and this is what I ask all of you to consider. Because what happened the other day in France happened in our backyard, in our European backyard. And it's not that far away, we all know that, and we have to be on guard. to work with our fellow human beings who happen to be citizens of Nice. Oh, by the way, that's our twin city, isn't it? Take that into account. How are we going to not just be sentimental about it, but to take action? And here's the other point. Who are our enemies? Well, they are representatives of the capacity of the human race, individuals and groups, to act against all normal, rational ideas of civilized behavior. I showed this exhibition in the European Parliament. I brought the European Parliament here to Scotland. I was asked to speak as part of the European Parliament, the first time it ever met here. And my theme was the world beyond conflict. That's the big task that he has as a politician, to try to use whatever we represent in terms of civilized life, to use all his energy to consider a world beyond conflict. And what did I use as the symbol of my exhibition in Brussels? I used the Paisley pattern, which doesn't come from Paisley, it comes from the world of Islam. Indeed. And so I'm saying to you, you can rely on him as a heavily disguised artist, as an artist politician. You can rely on him to add that special dimension representing you in his language, to make it clear that the Scots have a tremendously important responsibility to help Europe deal with a conflict which is beyond anybody's imagination. If you refer to something called what was it called? The Second World War. That was simple, straightforward. This one is going to test us to the breaking point. And so I have no choice. I must think of someone who knows how to deal with the very corridors of power in Europe. And I must tell you, he introduced me as professore. Thank you for that. Some people think I'm a gallery director. What a nonsense. Or a theatre director. How would I? That's not my job. I am emeritus professor of European Cultural Studies. And that's why I use that map. My job is to tell every single human being, every child, every person my age, that's people beyond the pale, you know, they're useless, stuff them into old folks' homes and consider that they have, well, I don't know, they don't have a 5-year plan, but I have. And I'm hoping he's going to help the whole of us, all of us here in this room, consider how we play an important role using our heritage, our cultural heritage, which is European, our language, which is a mixture of all these European languages, which I love. There's no such thing as Scotland separate from Europe. So, with that, I would like to say that when I was a professor, I had to write a professorial thesis before I was given this chair. And guess what I used? The title was The Challenge of the New Europe. And that was way back in 1992. I feel as if I've been a lone voice in the wilderness. Thank God, if you read The Scotsman today, you'll note that the director of the Edinburgh Festival has said he's had to rethink the whole future of the 70th anniversary of the festival, which will be possessed of one theme: the fact that it's an international festival, but it's located in Europe, and it's located in that place, that section of Europe on the periphery, which is called Scotland, which is, as far as I'm concerned, when I think of my great-grandmother, who was a Dubliner, Celtic, Irish. And I'm speaking as a European, as a I'm not Italian, I'm Roman, as a Romano-Celtic soul, looking forward to the kind of work that I associate with this extraordinary man. So we should support him, and we should help place him where he deserves to be. There's no one in our parliament at Hollywood who knows how to survive in a very complex situation of a world where we've got to get it right. We've got to lead. We have the language that the Europeans need. What's it called? What is this language, for God's sake? It's not Latin, which used to be the language of the student. It's the language which we use. It's the lingua franca of all politicians.
French.
That used to be. I love that. No, it's not Gaelic, sorry. We've got to face the fact it's the language of the computer. And it's the language of big business. And he's got to deal with big business. It's the language of all the forces of madness which cause us to be out of control when we think of how we're going to deal with something which has gone so completely wrong. And I'm not even going to dwell on the fact that our cousins, whatever you like to call them, on the wrong side of the Atlantic are in deep trouble. What a choice they've got. They need us, representing a force and a political reality, which is the Scottish dimension in the continent of Europe. I'm not even going to tell you how much I love every aspect of Europe that I experienced when I crossed the Iron Curtain, I don't know, about 60 times. What a stupidity. They had no money, they had no power. Oh yes, they had the one thing which we all need. They had the power to bring down the Iron Curtain. So let us think of why we're in this room. Not one thing here was paid for by the money coming from the Scottish cultural world. Every penny came from Poland. And to think that maybe the third language in Scotland is now Polish. For God's sake, we have to send out a message to say we are blessed with the presence of our Polish brothers and sisters. We need another 100,000 at least. So I'm going to ask my fellow artist, because Boyce said everyone is an artist, and if you look at a person straight in the face and you don't think of them as a fellow artist, then you are thinking of them as a, I don't know, plonker. He is not a plonker.
Praise indeed.
Anyway, let me say, it gives me the greatest pleasure and joy to know in this room, paid for by the city of Wrocław, which is the city, the European capital of culture. Indeed. And I've just been there, and they spent a fortune on asking me to think where I should put the Demarco archive, which is not mine. It's thousands and thousands of people who contributed to it. And he has contributed more than his fair share already. So let us listen to this extraordinary, highly cleverly disguised artist, poet, politician.
Richard Demarco, I adore this gentleman. He's like a mind-altering drug. He just spending time in his presence with his worldview. He's a gesamt Europäer, a true European. Wonderful to spend time in your presence, wonderful to see the works that you've done, and wonderful to have your support. Thank you so much. Mille grazie. It's great to see you all here today, because we're also here as well as celebrating Europe's culture and Scotland's part within that, because I want to put myself forward for Depute Leader of the SNP. And I really want to do that role. I really want to do that job, because I think we can achieve some amazing things for Scotland. We live in extraordinary times. Now is not a time for business as usual. We have an opportunity to put Scotland on the map and explain Scotland to our European friends and colleagues, and explain Europe to Scots as well, in a way that we have never done before. We have an opportunity to put Europe at the heart of independence, and the SNP at the heart of the Yes movement. And I believe I have a number of unique attributes that I can bring to that discussion. I've represented Scotland, as Richard says, in the European Parliament for 12 years now. Elected just after my 12th birthday. It was a remarkable thing. I get less and less of a laugh with that as time goes on, I have to say. I've been a frontline parliamentarian doing real heavy lifting on Scotland's behalf for over a decade. And I've picked up some stuff. I've made some pals. I've done some things. I've opened some doors. And I believe that we have an opportunity to bring independence closer than it has ever been for the people of this country. And my pitch is a simple one. Now's the time. We, the SNP, must embrace the European question at the very heart of how we do business. It's obvious to the Dougs in the street that the European question is going to be the defining attribute of politics in these islands for the next few years and the foreseeable future. We need to make clear to ourselves as a party, to Scotland, and to the wider world that we have chosen Europe as our future, where Westminster is our past. We can never win, we will never win in Westminster. This week's obscenity of the Trident vote being imposed upon Scotland against the clear, demonstrable wishes of Scotland's representatives proves that. I've shown you how much we can win in Europe. We are well liked, we are well thought of, we are well regarded. And within the EU, at a time when the EU really needs a good news story, Scotland could be it. A resource-rich, on the European continental scale, peripheral country of educated, well-off, oil, fish, gas, renewables, all the rest of the good stuff that we have, wanting to remain within the European project, the European family. We have a glittering opportunity to put Scotland's case to our European friends. And we need to do that directly. We need to learn the lessons of the last independence referendum in 2014, where we spoke quite rightly with the London representatives of the international media, the wider world, and often they viewed us with London's baggage. Within Brussels, we have a wider canvas and a greater opportunity to speak to Brussels, yes, and the institutions there, but through Brussels, the member state capitals. Because Scotland's European status, whatever it will be decided as much in Tallinn, Bratislava, Ljubljana, Lisbon, as it will in Brussels or London. We need someone who can take that message the length and breadth of Europe. We need someone who can come to Scotland and explain what's happening within the European continent to the people of Scotland. Because much as our vote in the referendum was unanimous across Scotland's councils, it wasn't unanimous. There remains a discussion to have within Scotland about our place within the world. But as we face the prospect of a bleak post-Brexit bargain basement Britain, there are a lot of decent, thoughtful people within Scotland reassessing their views of the SNP and reassessing their views of Scotland's place in the world. We must facilitate and help that discussion. We must be attractive to attract people into that debate. We need to tell the people of Europe what Scotland's all about. Trust me, they like what they hear. They need to hear it from us. I always say, my experience over the water, if you want to buy, you can buy in English. If you want to sell, you need to make more of an effort. And we need to sell Scotland right now. I can do that. And that's it brings me to my second USP, time. I have the time to do this. You may have noticed that my day-to-day workload has been pretty dramatically cleared recently. I have an opportunity. My role, my only role, is Scotland and Europe. It's to make sense of Brexit. It's to represent Scotland to the wider world. It's to represent Europe to the people of Scotland. The day-to-day that has taken up so much of my time previously has been cleared. Scotland's MEPs have united, 5 of Scotland's MEPs have united. One was posted missing, as you may have gathered. Have united to put the party badges to one side to get the best deal we can for Scotland. And we have differences of our politics within that, of course, but this is not the time for normal politics. So we have discussions the length and breadth of Europe, also discussions the length and breadth of Scotland, which is my third USP. As an MEP, my constituency is the whole of Scotland, from Shetland to Stranraer. I represent the whole of the nation within the European Parliament. The whole of the nation is my constituency. For 13 years I have been travelling the length and breadth of Scotland, working with and for our councillors, MSPs, MPs, grassroots, up and down the country. I have had a ringside seat as we have watched Scotland's attitude change to its place in the world and to the question of independence. I will continue that work. Same as I did within the European referendum, where I did upwards of 40 public meetings up and down the country to take the argument to where it was happening. I've long said if I sit in Brussels and wait for people to come to me, I'll wait quite a while. It's my job to get out and about. It's my job to sell, not buy. So I bring that to the table also. And my position within the party, a further strength. Where I have worked with and for local government, our national government at Holyrood, the MPs down at Westminster, I'm independent of all 3 institutions. I link and support them all, but I'm not beholden to one. My duty is to Scotland, my duty is to the cause, my duty is to the SNP. So I bring that to the table also. I have a relationship with the grassroots of the party nationwide. I have support in my depute bid from Dumfries and Galloway and Shetland, and everywhere in between. I've been blown away by the support that I have had. It's been heartening to see just how many people in Scotland, of the SNP and outside, have been switched on to the importance of the European question, and the symbolic importance and practical importance of us choosing Europe as our future at a time when these islands have by a slim majority chosen otherwise. And in the role of the grassroots, the other side of the Depute Leader, facilitating change within the party. We've been on a roller coaster since the independence referendum. 21 months ago we've had the membership surge, we've had the Westminster result, we've had the Holyrood result, we've had the European referendum. The party needs a bit of a time to think about our structures, to think about how we do things, to think about our organisation, to think about how we activate and cohere the unprecedented resources that the party is blessed to have. We have never had more people, we have never had more activists, we have never had more resources at our disposal. I think there is a job to be done in cohering those to make us fighting fit for what is going to come to follow. There's a wider independence movement as well. We're the SNP, and I'm proudly an SNP politician, but there's people who aren't persuaded by the SNP, but are persuaded by the cause of independence. The Yes movement looks to the SNP for leadership and relies upon us for organisation. We need to step up and we need to facilitate that network, work with that network and nurture that ecosystem around the party. There are many ways in which we can do that. We need to play our part in leading the debate within Scotland, even more than we do right now. We also need to discuss how we set our policy. Now in this I think our structures are quite fit for purpose. I think we have all the structures we need, but we do need a greater energy to involve the grassroots of the party in the discussion and formulation of policy. All European political parties have a think tank, a foundation attached to them. It is remarkable in Scottish politics that we have so few think tanks that are actually involved in policy, novel policy formulation. We need to encourage that discussion. New ideas are not something to be afraid of. For the SNP, we revel in the sense of the possible, and we can facilitate that. So it looks like we're going to have an interesting debate within the party. It looks like there's going to be 4 candidates, 4 very strong, very distinct propositions. And this is a traditional SNP contest. It's the same way as we rank our MEPs. This is not my first rodeo. I've been through this process a few times before. You step up, you make your case, you trust the members to make a choice on a 1 member, 1 vote, single transferable vote ballot. Then you all shake hands, and knowing us, you probably all go for a pint afterwards as well. So it's going to be an energising discussion of real ideas and real talent. I think it speaks well for the party that we are where we are. I would, in saying that, also add that, if anything, it's a little bit too gentlemanly. I would like to see women stand. I would encourage, as I always do, my female colleagues to put themselves forward. If I can assist in that nomination process, I'll be very happy to do so. The deadline for papers isn't until next Friday, so there is just still time if anybody's minded in that direction. So I think I bring a number of things to the table within this discussion. I think now is not a time for day-to-day politics. Now is a time for Scotland to make a choice about the sort of country we want to be, the sort of look we want to put forward to the wider world. It is assuredly not Boris Johnson and Theresa May. I think we can do better. I think we can choose better. I think I can play a role within that and work with and for the party and the cause, the length and breadth of Scotland and the length and breadth of Europe too. So I know you can rely on me, and I hope I can rely on you also. Thanks very much indeed for coming.
There must be countless questions now, because he's actually issued a challenge, which we all need. Without a challenge, we become less than human. We need a challenge every day. We've all been given the biggest challenge, probably, of our lifetimes. We must act. So, what are your questions? I need the first hand. Yes.
You mentioned your MEP colleagues representing Scotland. Those from other parties, I'd be very curious of your take on how they perceive the way forward for Scotland.
Give your name and your experience of Scotland. You're a fantastic Gaelic speaker, Gaelic musician, and therefore you're not just anyone. And we've known each other for years. Explain.
To answer the question, to an extent I can't speak for other people, but of the 5 MEPs, we rub along grand. We actually always have. Now, the MEPs, we have a different style of politics, often because there's a wee bit less scrutiny of what the MEPs traditionally are doing, often because the issues we're dealing with are more technical, so they're not going to make the front page anytime soon. We're also philosophically minded. The 5 of us do genuinely rub along well. I mean, we're often on the same flight. We'll sit with each other, have a coffee before we're going. So the human geography is there. The cooperation is there. And I was just so proud that we were able to step up and admit we can put the badges to one side and get a result where we agree. Now that's not to say that we're sitting in a circle singing Kumbaya, don't get me wrong. But
Yeah.
well, I'd rule nothing out at the moment. I've stopped being definitive about many things. But it does show that we'll step up. And there's a lot of nervous people within Scotland right now. There's a lot of nervous people within the UK. There's a lot of Scots, Brits, elsewhere in the EU, very nervous about what's coming, what their status is going to be. It grieves me that we're seeing a UK Prime Minister using people's status in the communities they live in as a bargaining chip in a negotiation. And I find that grievously offensive. And I'm concerned about the image that that puts to the UK within the eyes of our colleagues, and I'm worried about how that makes people feel. So in terms of how the other MEPs are feeling, in terms of the way forward, we've committed to work together where we can. I think there's a lot of scope for us doing that, and from our side we certainly will do that.
Alyn, Scott McNabb from the Scotsman. In terms of the way ahead, do you feel this de facto associate membership agreement can be arrived at where we stay in the UK as well as the EU, or do you think it's going to have to be independence? And if it's independence, that will surely hinge on reaching some kind of understanding or undertaking from the rest of the EU that Scotland and independent Scotland will either be able to stay in or would get admitted in. What are the chances of that happening?
Well, I think there's about 7 hypotheticals in there, which is pretty much where life is at the moment. But from our side, I've been privileged, outside of my role within the party, to be appointed onto Nicola's Standing Council on Europe, which is a panel of real experts, and me. And our job is to come up with solutions. And one of the things that I've been reassuring colleagues about in Brussels and in Scotland politically as well is that, look, nobody can accuse us of having brought this situation about. We campaigned for Europe, we educated for Europe, we voted for Europe, we rejected the politics of Brexit, we didn't bring this about, we didn't ask for this. So this is not our secret squirrel plan to achieve our dearest wish. Our job as a serious party is to get the best deal for Scotland. So within my own team and within the work that I've been doing, we've been looking at various other places that have status. And I'm not talking about membership, I'm talking about status, because if you're talking about membership, you have a discussion there. If you're talking about status, it's a much wider, hazier concept for where we are right now. Variable geometry in the Brussels lexicon, we already have variable geometry within the UK. You've got the Isle of Man, you've got the Channel Islands that have different status vis-a-vis the UK. You've got Gibraltar as well, has got different status. You've got the issues that we're facing as Scotland. There is a range of interests across the vote. Gibraltar, freedom of movement is existential for Gibraltar, in a very real sense. Likewise, the creation of a hard border between the north and south of the island of Ireland is a huge set of issues that has been thrown up in the air without any sort of exit strategy. It's disgraceful politics, truly disgraceful. So from our perspective, it is about engaging in a granular discussion about finding solutions. There's the Azores, there's the Åland Islands, we've heard about reverse Greenland, well what about upside down Guadeloupe, what about left-handed Faroes? There are other scenarios that we could be looking at within this. But our starting point is that Scotland voted to remain. And even in my speech back in the Parliament, I specifically said status and Esprit Européen. Scotland has chosen something else. We expect something different out of this. And I think with a sufficiently granular engagement on policy and, I'll quote myself again, cool heads and warm hearts, I think there are solutions to be found. Your question about independence, it is on the table, of course. What self-respecting government wouldn't explore every and each option?
Having that national, obviously at the weekend David Davis said Scotland cannot continue to be a member of both the UK and the EU. There's clearly the prospect, increasing likelihood of the prospect of a second independence referendum. How would you, going forward into that situation, persuade people who voted no last time round to vote yes in the next independence referendum? How do you go with target no voters?
I think we need to remain attractive and competent and credible and on the job. Our role in this, and I have never been more proud to be an SNP politician than when I saw Nicola Sturgeon the day after a disastrous vote step out of Butte House looking every bit the international stateswoman she is and reassure the people at EU nationals within Scotland that we celebrate you, your place here is safe and we will do all we can to protect and promote it. I've never been more proud. There are a lot of decent people who voted no in the last referendum on the basis that that would safeguard their place in Europe. They can now. There was a number of people who voted no on the basis of lots of other promises that were made during those years. I think accountability in politics is really, really important. And we've seen a Leave campaign that lied and lied and lied and lied and then thinks it can get away with it. No wonder politicians are held in such poor regard in some parts. So in terms of the wider discussion about independence, I think that's one issue of a range of issues. My focus within my day job in Brussels is to look for solutions to where we are, to make sure that Scotland's voice is heard in Brussels and the member state capitals. And within the party, I think the policy remit in terms of making sure we're an attractive place for people to look to and come to and join is the role of the whole party, and we need to cohere that effort into a really effective fighting force. Liz.
Okay. I'm just wanted to ask, you talked about kind of softening of the relationship with leaders in Europe and in Brussels compared to what was like in 2014 meeting with the independence structure. I'm just wondering what's your sense from your colleagues in Brussels and your friends as to kind of some of the areas for Scotland's position and how much political will you need to find a solution to Scottish independence or be it Scotland staying with and
Well, I refer you to a standing ovation that happened in the European Parliament quite recently. There is a huge awareness. And I've said a number of times before that in 2014 there was a number of people within Brussels, within capitals, who didn't quite get the why of independence. They knew as well that there has been an almost total inversion of the attitudes to Scotland. There is a recognition that we voted to remain. There is a recognition that we expect something different. Now, whatever that something different is remains to be seen. But Brussels is good at this sort of stuff. There are ways that can be found. And that'll come down to political goodwill, which I believe absolutely firmly exists in spades for us. Also about the complexity, recognising the complexity of the UK in terms of finding solutions for other places too, particularly the Northern Ireland question, which is the Northern Ireland peace process has been underpinned by EU money and is a really fragile situation in a way that we're not. So there's an awareness and a willingness in Brussels to find solutions to where we are, and that will depend upon the ongoing discussions, the ongoing interactions, the ongoing representation of Scotland within those discussions. But absolutely, there has been a step shift in terms of how Scotland is perceived. And don't underestimate as well the importance that Scotland plays in this. At a time when the EU really needs a good news story, we could be it. You know, talking to Richard yesterday, and Richard talked about English being the lingua franca of the European Union, the world. There's one for the linguists in the room. The fact that part of these islands has decided that it's not wanting to be European actually makes it all the more important that this part of these islands underlines that it is and wants to remain so.
Does that not only happen with independence though?
I don't think it does, and I wouldn't close off any option. Now, don't get me wrong, I am proudly pro-independence, and as is the party. But we did not bring this situation about. Our job is to find solutions. And I'm increasingly talking about quantum constitutional theory. We're going to take this stuff to places that it's never been. But the EU is good at finding solutions to this stuff. Look at the Greenland situation. Look at the East German reunification. There are ways that can be found if there's a political will to do it. Look at Canada, where immigration, nationality stuff is often much more dealt with on a provincial rather than a federal level. There are things that we're looking at which give us opportunities. It's also apparent that we've seen absolutely no clarity coming out of Westminster and Whitehall about what leave actually is going to look like. The Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Commons just yesterday, it was grossly negligent of the last government, remember that, barely a week ago, to not prepare for a leave vote. The only functioning bits of government in the UK state were the Bank of England and the Scottish Government. We're in strange times, and my job is to find solutions. Independence is on the table, absolutely, but my job is to find solutions, and I don't rule anything out or anything in.
Colin.
Alyn, we met yesterday.
You did?
For the first time, so may I say cher ami?
Chocolat.
And one or two quips for you. First of all, Richard. Richard, I think, is a cultural politician heavily inspired by Scotland. Furthermore, okay, I'm going to declare myself. I am not utterly violent. And I was a no voter. So I'm not quite sure that I'm here. But maybe it's a book launch for the famous work by Mr. Smith on the theory of moral sentiments.
Best of my knowledge, no relation, but I'll claim anything that's going.
So, as a no voter, and I may say with family and friends who are staunchly unionists, but not party line, I wish you well. I really do. It's good for that leadership. So a variation on the lady's question down here, because whether it's Brexit in the context of the UK, or the question of independence in the case of Scotland, these issues are inevitably divisive. So I'm going to ask you an emotional question. What are we going to hear? That sense of division between friends and family. There's my question. Very good question. I wish you well.
Yeah, Councillor, and a very good question, a very fair question. I mean, we've just lived through the European referendum, and the echoes of the independence referendum for me were absolutely unmistakable. We saw UK-wide effectively two Eurosceptic campaigns. Just one of them wanted you to remain. One of them was saying, you're right, it is a bit rubbish, but we've got a special exemption from all the stuff that's annoying, and it's really important for the economy, and yes, I just vote Remain. And little wonder it didn't quite work. And the Scottish official Remain campaign was better, but this was a star-crossed exercise from the start, in a way that, in my view, and in the view of lots of others, the independence campaign was an energising debate about possibilities. People were able to debate actual propositions. We produced a white paper, we put out our proposition for change. It was about possibilities. And I think that's the way we need to have the ongoing discussion, whatever it's going to be. And I'd reiterate my point to Scott, I don't rule anything in or out at the moment. We did not create this situation. But we do have an unprecedented situation where the people of Scotland are looking at this stuff in a way that they're thinking really hard about previous choices and thinking really hard about where they are. And that's a tough process. I really, really appreciate that. But I'm good at working across parties. I'm good at working with people of different views to me. I learned really quite early on as a politician that you get an awful lot more done if you just get a bit less angry and focus on what unites rather than what divides.
Yes.
And I think where we are in Scotland just now, look at the vote in the Holyrood Parliament endorsing the Scottish Government's European strategy. It was 98 votes to 0. The Conservatives abstained, which was a result. But there's cross-party unanimity about we need to find a solution to this, whatever that solution might be. And I'm totally up for all solutions being on the table and tested. As Adam Smith, the truth is an honest disagreement amongst friends.
Yes.
I think that's the spirit that we need to do this sort of stuff in, because a country of 5.5 million people, we're too small to fall out. We'll always be sharing this space. And I think in terms of healing, it's how you have the discussion that helps the healing process afterwards.
Yeah.
Hi, Dan Sanderson from the Herald. The debate over currency and what currency Scotland might use is obviously got a big crowd over the last few weeks. Just wondering where you stood in terms of whether you think moving away from pounds now would be the best option, and would joining the euro be a price worth paying if it meant Scotland staying in Europe?
Yeah. People get themselves tied up about the currency stuff, where I have to say I'm much more pragmatic about it. I think at the proper time, once the policy has gone through the proper channels of the party, we'll set forward our proposition. Meantime, we're looking at all the options. I understand our Westminster guys are looking at various options just now. I'm not aware of any moves to change policy being brought forward. But of course our guys are looking into the research. Of course our guys are looking at stuff. But as I say, and I have to reiterate, let's not tie ourselves in knots about things that are at present hypothetical. Sterling was viewed as a solid prospect quite recently, and look at where it's gone lately. A friend of mine went to Ibiza, lucky swine, just the other day and had to pay £210 to get €200. As lots of people are going on their holidays over the summer, the currency question will be brought home to a lot of people about the reality of this stuff. So I think there's a case for pragmatism and proper timing on that sort of stuff. I wouldn't tie my hands on anything, one way or the other.
Any more questions? Oh, I want.
Summerhall University of Aarhus.
The University of what?
Of Aarhus in Denmark.
Oh my God. Are you again?
Word of your fame.
Yes.
Well, I've been here a couple of months. You talk of doing Europe in Europe. Could you elaborate on what you mean by that?
That's essentially a comment about how we've engaged with the world previously. The Scottish Government, because of the devolved competencies, the devolved priorities, we've got Europe Division, which is fantastic, great bunch of folks. We've got Scotland House, which is also fantastic, great bunch of folks. We've got Scotland Europa, where I did an internship a million years ago. We've got all the apparatus, but politically we do need to engage. And particularly as the SNP, we do need to engage not just via London, but via Brussels itself and the member state capitals. We need to go to Ljubljana and sell. We need to go to Bratislava and sell. We need to go to Lisbon and sell and explain directly what's happening in Scotland. Because there's huge interest, but what we must do is a sustained and focused communications effort to explain what's going on in Scotland to the wider world and the member state capitals, but also coming back and explaining what's going on within the EU and the Brexit stramash as it rolls forward to the people of Scotland. So I believe, uniquely qualified in that role, in that I have a nationwide mandate within Scotland, I have a track record of getting out where the argument is, and I have a track record of representing Scotland within Brussels and the wider world. And I've also got the time to do it. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, can I follow it up? Are you taking a page out of your former colleague Romero's book and the establishment of Catalan embassies or foreign offices around Europe?
No, it's not about that. It's me offering my services to go and be a freelance roving Sherpa for Nicola. It's much more of a personal proposition than anything about structures or government stuff. It's a personal bit.
Obviously across the UK, 3/4 of young people voted to remain in Scotland and then scared the future of it and saturation on a European stage. So what would your message be to young people who are really concerned about European situation?
They're vital. My only message that I can promise is we're on it. And I still like to think of myself as a vaguely young person, but I took advantage of the European rights that we now risk losing. I studied on Erasmus being a creation of Winnie Ewing when she was president of the Culture Committee.
Brilliant.
It was one of our best chats.
My God, we're not going to throw that away, are we?
I hope not.
You mean there's a danger it's going to happen?
There is.
Well, that's the kind of thing talking to people shouldn't have to say.
There's an uncertainty, and I wouldn't put it stronger than that, because Norway does participate within Erasmus from outside the EU. It costs them, and it costs them considerably more than it would us presently. So there are ways that can be found, and this is where I think we need to engage on a granular level about the policies that are important, about Erasmus, about Scottish universities getting way overrepresented within the Horizon 2020 research budget. So there's EU-funded research going on in every single Scottish institution. All of that is now at risk. We are seeing signs already that European projects, European consortiums, are not hooking up with UK participants, because there's that element of, well, will you actually be part of the programme in a wee while? So it's that sort of stuff that we need to safeguard. It's not just about the flags and anthems. Yeah. It's about the engagement on a granular level, policy by policy. And in terms of Scotland and the UK's young people's attitudes to this, the only promise I can make is that that's really close to my heart, and we are on it.
There was a time when the elite of Scotland, the young travelling scholars, went from St Andrews or Glasgow Medieval University. I don't know if Edinburgh was a medieval university, but Aberdeen, and they went to Oxford, Cambridge, they went to the Sorbonne, they went to Padua, they went to the Jagiellonian in Krakow.
Leiden, Heidelberg.
Leiden, Heidelberg. You must understand. I mean, I can't believe that I had breakfast with Marshall McLuhan. And I heard from his lips, you know, young man, I remember it was such a long time ago, I was young. He said, we're living in a global village, and you'll soon learn that. And the medium is the message. Now, the young people at our universities are living in that village, and they must learn how to deal with the media, which is, I can actually feel very sad about this. They were instrumental in giving the wrong information to the general public. So when they voted, they didn't have the real facts to make their decision. And so I feel we must see this now. Even in the last 10 years, the world has changed. We've got this bloody, what do you call it, phone thing. I don't have one, because I'm far too old for that sort of rubbish. But it controls everything. And so therefore we've got to gear ourselves up to that kind of, how can I say, parish. It's a way of our voice being heard, coming from Europe, being heard in the continent of Africa, in whatever China represents, whatever Russia represents, so that this voice is literally taken seriously. At the moment it's not, because we don't have the international, how can I say, platform. We've got it in the arts through the Edinburgh Festival, but that's, well, it's not quite as strong as when it's dealing with something called the United Nations or NATO or the European Parliament. The fact that we are not, how can I say, properly represented where big decisions are made about the future of young people. The young people of this world are the ones that are going to have to deal with the developments that have taken place in the last 10 years. And yet, the decision was made, apparently, by people who are even younger than me, but very, very old people. And I can't get my mind around why 70-year-old people voted the way they did in all sorts of parts of Britain, which were not Scotland, which caused the Brexit reality to develop. But I'm just going to ask a question here. How do we help young people in the next 10 years, for example, to make the best use of a world that Joseph Beuys defined as a free international university? Because education is universal. You were educated in an international way. You would wish that upon anyone you know. How can we create this opportunity for young people? That's the question the Scotsman should be asking. How are we going to do it? You can't properly educate any human being within the limitations of the experience of Scotland. You can't do it, not now. Maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you could certainly do it, but not now. It has to be our knowledge of the world that makes us lament the madness of the Nice massacre. You know, that's happening to us. It's not happening to the French. It's happening to what our way of life is that we share with the French. So I feel that question, how old are you?
70.
Very young, ridiculous. So, it's just begun. What do we do in offering him this structure? How can Scotland think that way, beyond the limitations of Scottish politics? Because it's a world problem. Well, it's a European problem, okay? So we've got to start thinking like that, because there's no point going to a Scottish university thinking that's where you're going to complete your education. Not nowadays, not now with the technology we have. We've got to think of how we engage in what used to be called let me think, what was it called? The Grand Tour.
Exactly.
And we sent all our top level people on a study of Europe so that they would become the best architects, the best scientists, the best philosophers, the best theologians. That's what we did in the 19th, 18th centuries. And that created something called, what was it called? Oh, Scottish Enlightenment. I can't see an enlightenment at the moment. Maybe we're dealing at this moment with a Scottish endarkenment. Think of that.
Well, that's what we're fighting for. And that's where I want to see precisely the way of exchange. Younger folk especially don't view the EU, don't view Europe as foreign in the way that it used to be.
Yeah.
Grand old man that I am, I remember when much of Central Eastern Europe was red, with nuclear weapons pointed against us. And I remember the fall of the Berlin Wall. I did my master's in Warsaw at a time when Central Eastern Europe was going through an unprecedented sense of change. I watched Poland get its independence back. I watched the energising sense of possibility. And it was exciting. It was scary as well for a lot of people. We need to be aware people are intrinsically afraid of change. But if we grab that change, and this situation has been thrust upon Scotland,
Yes.
and it's the job of Scotland's government, it's the job of Scotland's politicians to unite and save what's good. And the fact that we are part of a system, which is all the EU is, it's a system for people getting to know each other better by living, working, studying, travelling, retiring, trading in each other's countries with a minimum of fuss. And the governments of Europe getting to know each other better by sitting down and negotiating about all sorts of nuts and bolts mechanical stuff. The idea that we would cut ourselves off from that grieves me really deeply.
Oh.
And Scotland wants to see something else happen.
There's a young woman here who...
Final question. Oh.
Fortunately, the internet has enabled throughout Britain fiery engagement in young people and middle-aged people.
Not old people.
Well, I'll just say my name's Barbara Greenwood. I'm SNP member. That's all, retired. But I am a very active activist for anti-TTIP. And I've emailed you, I get your emails, and I'm very actively following your work. Fortunately, young people here are absolutely on fire with preventing TTIP and the bamboozlement of the EU commissioners to hell or high water drive this through, and all that it will involve. Once they have succeeded in pushing this through, to hell with what slight minority think of TTIP, it will go ahead. That's the drive which made me vote to leave the EU. I'm an SNP member, and the same hatred of bamboozlement of Westminster on Scotland, which makes me an independent voter, because I come from Westminster. The same fire made me say, as the American said to you, you're going to learn this. Well, Westminster can learn it, but the EU can learn it too. The EU learned it from all the people who voted to wash their hands of Europe because of the EU commissioners' bamboozlement. Push through TTIP.
I think that penny's dropped. I think that penny has dropped within Brussels. There's a real awareness that business as usual cannot now happen.
Got to change.
And that's where Scotland can be really helpful within that discussion. And that's where, at a time when the EU is being questioned across the length and breadth of Europe by its populations, and the principle of multilateralism is itself under threat, and we must guard that. I want my country to be independent, but I want my country to voluntarily work with other independent states towards common endeavours. So you're right, lots of things do need to change. Next question.
Now.
Yeah, you've talked a lot about a granular approach, perhaps moving forward. A granular approach is the way forward for the EU itself.
There's a lot of thoughts in the mix on this, and this is where explaining what's going on within the EU and Europe to Scotland is somewhere where I think I sit at the confluence of both, in a way that few other people do. The Germans in particular are talking about EU 2.0.
Yes.
The idea that the EU needs a new mission statement.
Yeah.
The original mission statement was get the people of Europe closer together, yes, but largely that was done through economic means, which meant that there was a prism that lots of stuff were seen through thereafter. The single market is now largely completed in legislative terms. So we see that within the Parliament. There's less and less single market legislation coming through.
Yeah.
But what I would want to see the European Union focusing upon, which would legitimise the efforts in the eyes of a lot of people, are things like how do we deal with the common challenges that affect humanity?
Yes.
And that is climate change, that is energy efficiency, that is renewables, that is ecosystem management, that is all the stuff that actually are affecting lots of millions of people worldwide. And we will achieve more acting voluntarily within a system of working with other countries than trying to reinvent the wheel on a daily basis. So this is an existential moment for the EU as well.
Yes.
In this. There's a lot of soul searching going on across the European continent right now. And that's where I think Scotland has so much to bring to that table. And the EU has so much that we could benefit, that the EU could benefit from hearing for Scotland.
I think on that note, because I've just had a signal from your assistant to say that sadly, the hour is up. And what a speed with which it passed. Because we're dealing with a very, how can I say, important matter, which is to do with our future. As human beings belonging not to Scotland, but to Scotland in Europe and Europe in the world. How the hell are we going to deal with the United States of America if Donald Trump is the president? How are we going to do that? That is a big question, and only our voice in Europe will be able to deal with the States economically, politically, and otherwise. But I would like to say thank you to the most extraordinary thought process that this extraordinary man has revealed. He's given me hope. I don't get hope, but many hopeful ideas nowadays. Most of the time listening to that awful thing called the BBC News at 10 o'clock, which is a kind of news up entertainment. But today, I think we've heard a very heartwarming, loving appreciation of a human being wanting to give us some kind of hope in the future, immediately. So I would say that within the next few days, or whatever it is, weeks, we do the right thing, and we have the best possible representative I can imagine, who is educated partly in Europe, representing us on the stage of the European Parliament, and therefore helping us here in our local parliament to have our voice heard. So I'd like to thank him, and on your behalf, I would like all of you to wish him well.